Welcome to the Deconstructionist Deep Dive, the podcast that doesn't just accept the story.
We break it.
We examine the pieces.
And expose the machinery inside.
Let's dive in.
What if everything about the Shangri-La myth of Tibetan Buddhism isn't just wrong, but is designed to be wrong? So today we're taking a deep dive into that whole narrative around Tibetan Buddhism, the one most people know. We're aiming to move beyond, the surface stuff, the common teachings, and really investigate the complicated, sometimes hidden realities underneath that idealized picture.
Exactly. And we're going to use the sources you provided as our map, really. Our goal here is to unpack these fascinating contradictions. You have this global image of Tibet as like this pure, nonviolent spiritual place. And then you have its actual history, its social structures, its economics, which are way more complex. We want to help you see that full, intricate picture and maybe understand why these simpler stories stick around. Okay, so let's just jump right in. When most of us think of Tibet, we probably get a pretty standard image, right? Like this intensely spiritual place, purely Vajrayana Buddhist, guided by compassion. The kind of timeless Shangri-La. Inner peace central. It's the postcard version. The serene monk, the prayer flags.
That postcard. It's beautiful, no doubt, but it's curated. What our sources show almost immediately is this stark contrast, this lived paradox, because that same society, historically, it was also built on a really rigid feudal hierarchy. It had its own complex indigenous ways of understanding gender, things like surmas and gondras, we'll get into those terms, and the monasteries. Those revered institutions, yes, absolutely centers for deep spiritual practice, but also centers of intense political power, of gender exclusion, actually, and significant social control.
Right.
It wasn't just a spiritual haven, it functioned like a state, a complex one.
That's a really powerful distinction. So for you listening, here's the core question we want to keep in mind as we go. How does Tibetan Buddhist culture, and especially the way it's projected globally, manage this huge gap, this cognitive dissonance between the ideals, non-attachment, compassion, and the reality of embedded power structures, gender inequality, and, political authority? It's a fascinating tension.
Definitely. Let's maybe start with the history lens. What becomes clear pretty quickly is that pre-modern Tibet wasn't just, spiritual vibes. It operated as a theocracy, a feudal one. The whole idea of it being purely spiritual kind of wipes away the fact that the monastic estates, these spiritual hubs, owned enormous amounts of land, and crucially, they owned serfs, people bound to the land called misir.
Wow. Okay. So that means the Dalai Lama, who we think of primarily as a spiritual leader, historically he held both roles, spiritual and temporal ruler.
Exactly. This wasn't just a loose collection of monasteries. It was a state apparatus. It had taxes. It had laws. It even had punishments. It was a functioning government, ruled theocratically. And this Shangri-La idea, the sources strongly suggest it's mostly a modern thing, often a Western projection, actually. It functions to make Tibet seem exotic, maybe, but also to kind of depoliticize it, to erase that complex state-based history and turn it into this pure spiritual brand, which naturally leads us to the money side, the economics, because this paradox isn't just historical, it's big business right now. Tibetan Buddhism as a brand. It's a global, multi-million-dollar industry. You see it everywhere. The Dalai Lama's image is commodified, thankensas, meditation retreats, yoga workshops. It's huge.
It's a serious economic engine, isn't it?
Yeah.
You mentioned it funds the exile government, monastic universities. But the point from the sources is that this economic need, it forces them to keep that pure land myth alive, right?
Precisely. Certain interpretations, certain images, they're fine. They're marketable. They're promoted. But anything that complicates the picture, critiques of monastic power, real talk about gender hierarchies. Not so much. That doesn't fit the brand, doesn't sell as well, gets kind of swept under the rug.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, looking through the theological lens. Because if you dig into core Buddhist ideas, like anātman, this concept of no self, it's fundamentally radical, isn't it? Anātman basically deconstructs any fixed identity, including gender.
Right. It should. Theoretically.
Yet the institutions, the powerful structures within Tibetan Buddhism, have often interpreted the Vinaya, that's the monastic code, right? It governs everything.
Conduct, hierarchy, everything.
They've interpreted that in ways that actually reinforce a pretty strict gender binary.
Which is quite the irony, yeah. A philosophy aimed at dissolving fixed identities gets used by institutions to police them. And this has historically meant, well, the subjugation of nuns bhikkhans, often denying them access to full ordination lineages. That's been a major point of conflict for centuries.
Wow.
And even the Dalai Lama, this figure seen globally as embodying universal compassion. He leads an institution that has historically upheld some very specific, sometimes exclusionary rules based on that interpretation of the Vinaya. It's a complex navigation for him, too, no doubt.
It really forces the question, doesn't it?
Who benefits? Who benefits from pushing this very specific, unified spiritual nation story out to the world? Because narratives like this, they always serve someone's purpose. They aren't neutral.
Absolutely. And looking at the sources, you can kind of pinpoint a few key groups. First, obviously, the Tibetan exile political structure. Presenting a unified cultural identity is crucial for them, for international support, for resisting Chinese assimilation attempts. It's politically vital.
Survival, in a way.
Then, second, you've got the religious hierarchies themselves. Maintaining this narrative helps uphold the authority of the Tulku system, identifying reincarnate lamas, which concentrates immense power. And it positions the monastic elites as the ultimate gatekeepers of authentic Tibetan culture.
Right, the arbiters.
And third, looking globally, the wellness industry, big time. It gives them a perfectly clean, easy-to-sell product. Spirituality stripped bare of messy politics, difficult history, social issues, just pure marketable peace.
Yeah.
And connecting this to the bigger picture. Even the language itself hints at these suppressed realities. The sources bring up these Tibetan terms, surma, referring to female-to-male cross-dressing or identity, and gondra, which is apparently a derogatory term, but it points to effeminate men or male-assigned people taking female roles.
Interesting.
These aren't just words. They show that indigenous understandings of gender variance existed. Maybe not always accepted, sure, but recognized. It challenges that simple image of just celibate monks and idealized female devotees. Reality was clearly more varied, maybe more fluid than the current narrative allows.
What's really striking here is that this tension, this push and pull between the spiritual ideal and the realities of institutional power, it's not unique to Tibet at all. It's basically a global constant. You see it everywhere.
Yeah, think about the Vatican and LGBTQ plus Catholics, right? You have this core message of universal love running right up against institutional rules condemning same-sex relationships or gender transitions.
Or look at Thailand, Thai Buddhism. The ideal is monastic renunciation, detachment, but it exists side by side with a huge visible sex trade, often literally next door to temples. There's this complex social dynamic that seems to defy the simple spiritual ideal. Or even think about state-run Islamic republics and Sufism. You often see the state enforcing a strict interpretation of Sharia while trying to suppress or control these more individualistic, sometimes ecstatic, sometimes gender-bending Sufi mystical practices.
Right.
The pattern is there. But what makes the Tibetan situation unique and also incredibly sensitive is their status as a government in exile. And what the sources describe as being victims of cultural genocide under Chinese rule.
That changes the stakes completely.
It creates this incredibly strong incentive to present that unified, idealized front to the world. Any internal criticism, any sign of division, or frankly imperfection could potentially be grabbed and weaponized by the Chinese government.
Which puts internal critics or reformers in a really difficult position.
Exactly.
And this really points to a kind of universal truth, doesn't it? No spiritual tradition is ever just one thing. A monolith. They're all ongoing. Maybe battlegrounds is too strong a word, but contested spaces between institutional power, which always wants stability, control, predictability, and the more messy, direct personal experiences. Mystical, indigenous, individual quests for the divine or just authentic selfhood.
Yeah.
The pure tradition, in that sense, is always a political project. It's constructed.
Okay, let's try and pin down the core deceptions we've kind of unpacked here. The first big one, we're calling it the deception of the apolitical spiritual haven.
Right, the Shangri-La idea minus the politics.
Exactly. It's a nationalist myth, essentially, and it involves erasing a lot of history. The power source, well, we've touched on it. The Tibetan exile government benefits and meets that image for international support, and the global wellness industry. It gets a nice, clean, depoliticized spirituality. It can sell easily. Need cross-cultural proof. Think about how India is often packaged. Land of Gandhi's nonviolence, which is partly true, of course, but it conveniently glosses over immense historical and ongoing issues, caste violence, political conflict, religious tensions. It simplifies the brand.
And looking through the freedom lens here, why does this matter to you, the listener? Well, this kind of lie limits genuine understanding. It prevents an honest reckoning with the complexities of Tibetan history and society, both for people inside the culture and those outside. It can force Tibetans into performing an idealized role, stifling internal debate about power, gender, needed reforms, all because they fear undermining the larger cause against oppression. It limits authentic expression.
Okay, deception number 2, the deception of doctrinal gender neutrality.
The idea that the core teachings are gender neutral, so any inequality is just incidental.
Sort of. It's a theological simplification, really. The power source, primarily the monastic hierarchy. Maintaining patriarchal structures benefits them. It keeps male monks in positions of authority, it lets them control narratives about rebirth and gender, and it limits the power and influence of nuns, the bhikkhuns, and other women.
And the cross-cultural proof.
Think about the Christian concept, love the sinner, hate the sin. It's often used, right, to maintain institutional opposition to things like homosexuality while still projecting an image of compassion. It allows the institution to hold on to its doctrinal stance without appearing, completely unloving. But it doesn't actually change the discriminatory practice.
That's a good comparison. And for individuals caught in this,
Yeah.
especially women, gender-variant people, this lie forces a really painful choice, doesn't it? It pits their faith against their own lived reality, their full humanity. Kind of uses these high-minded abstract ideals like no self to dismiss very real, tangible suffering and inequality.
Exactly. And the third deception, the deception of the perfect leader.
Focusing everything on the Dalai Lama.
Yeah. It's partly a nationalist myth again, and also a huge theological simplification. The power source is clear. It consolidates authority around one figure. The Dalai Lama is genuinely revered, a potent symbol of their struggle, no question. This simplifies things for diplomacy, helps maintain unity, but the potential downside, highlighted in the sources, is that it can stifle other voices. It can hinder the growth of broader, more resilient political institutions.
Right. It makes everything dependent on one person.
And for cross-cultural proof, some people talk about the Mandela effect in South Africa. The global image became purely about reconciliation, which was crucial, but it's sometimes erased as more radical economic and political stances. It created a safer, more universally acceptable icon, maybe trimming the more challenging edges for global consumption.
And the freedom lens on this one puts an almost impossible weight on one individual, doesn't it? But maybe more importantly, it can prevent the community from developing a really robust, multi-voiced leadership structure, one capable of internal critique, evolution. It risks shrinking a whole complex culture down to a single, almost mythic figure, limiting its own future possibilities. Okay, so let's bring it all together. The synthesis, the detonation point, maybe the ultimate deception running through all of this is the idea that spirituality can ever truly exist separate from culture, from power, from history. The myths that are hardest to see are the ones that tell us they aren't myths at all, that they're just pure truth, handed down, untouched by messy human reality. The Pure Land is always constructed, always.
So our challenge to you is this, a kind of cognitive recalibration. You have to reject the postcard. You have to embrace the paradox. Try to see the Tibetan Buddhist not as some serene emoji from a wellness app, but as a real human being. Navigating this incredibly complex inheritance, feudal history, the politics of exile, global capitalism breathing down their necks, and genuinely profound philosophical truths, all at the same time. Because true compassion isn't about blindly buying into a brand.
No, it's about clear-eyed solidarity, standing with people in all their messy, contradictory reality, people struggling for authenticity, often within and sometimes against the very systems, cultural, political, religious, that try to define them. Maybe your own practice, your own journey towards understanding. It isn't about finding peace by just ignoring the contradictions. Maybe it's about finding a deeper kind of peace by actually holding them, by understanding them, and hopefully eventually transcending them. And that's our deep dive for this week.
Remember, the most dangerous illusion is the one you don't know you're in.
But now you know. So here's our question for you. What is the one mental cage, the one unquestioned story about spirituality, culture, or yourself that this conversation makes you want to break free from?
Let us know in the comments. Question the narrative. Deconstruct the dogma. See the system.
We'll see you next time. Stay skeptical.